Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. We're a global community of yoga therapists and related professionals who are sharing our knowledge and experience with one another to make the world a better place for all of us to thrive. On this podcast, we have deep and thought-provoking conversations that we hope will nourish you and make you feel more connected to yourself and to others. Feel free to continue these conversations on our private Facebook group called Yoga Therapy Hour Podcast with Amy Wheeler, and listen at the end of the podcast each week as we'll be giving away a special gift. Remember, we have a mobile app coming out May 2nd, 2022 that tracks mental health and so much more using the foundations of yoga and Ayurveda. Welcome, and today our guest is Nrithya Jagannathan from the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram in Chennai, India, which happens to be the tradition that I've been studying in since the year 2000. And I feel like I've grown up in this tradition. I've visited the KYM 7 different times. And some of the things that Nrithya and I talk about in this episode are the bird model, which many of us know as the Pancha Maya Model, the 5 layers of the human system. And in yoga therapy, we use the physical, the breath or the prana, the mental, the personality or life experience, and then the deeper, possibly even spiritual layers, the Anandamaya, the joy layer. We use these in both assessment, but also in terms of therapeutic planning. And so we go into quite a bit of detail in this episode about the bird model, but then specifically, I'm very interested in why is it that Sir Desikachar was so just passionate about the Vijnanamaya layer and oftentimes said things like, if your relationships aren't working out, your yoga isn't working out, meaning that your relationships will be better if you're doing an appropriate yoga practice, right? The heart of yoga. And so Nrithya and I talk so much about just the personality layer and how important that is as a yoga therapist to come with the gentleness, the sweetness, the friendliness to make our clients feel good and happy and seen and heard. And that in and of itself is a big part of the healing. And, when I first met Sir back in the very, very early 2000s, I'm going to show you a picture of him for those of you that can see the website that I've just pulled up, which is kym.org. I remember thinking how unassuming he was, how humble he was. I actually saw him running across the street between cars and traffic in his green collared shirt, which he oftentimes wore, a light green shirt, and a long dhoti. And when I saw him running through the traffic and, very light on his feet, I was very surprised when I went into the classroom and there he was on stage. And I thought, oh, that's the gentleman that I just saw running through the traffic. And then when he got on stage, he was so sweet and so friendly and so kind and gentle. And I just thought, that's the kind of person I want to study with, right? So from the very, very beginning, that Vijnanamaya layer is what called to me. And it's actually what's kept me with the teachers at the KYM for 20 years now, more than 20 years, because I see that they are living their yoga, right? The teacher who gives me all of my practices now, my personal practices, who we'll talk to next week on the podcast. Her name is Geeta Shankar. She studied under Desikachar for decades. And I have a picture of her up here too on the website. But I look forward to our meetings because I feel so good and so happy each and every time that I spend an hour with her, which is a couple of times a month. And that sweetness just carries me through the rest of my week. So I don't think we can underestimate the personality layer, the Vijnanamaya layer. And we talk a lot about that. And then we also get into pranayama and what it is that Sir and Krishnamacharya brought to yoga therapy around pranayama expressing itself in so many different ways that really is very, very unique to the tradition and therefore has become kind of a hallmark for yoga therapy in general. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I really love listening to Nrithya, and I think you'll see her brilliance. So enjoy. Welcome, Nrithya. We're so happy to have you here to talk about the bird model. And would you mind if we started with a prayer together today?
Certainly. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi आबाहु पुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं श्रीमते अनन्ताय नागराजाय नमो नमः। श्री कृष्ण वागीशयतीश्वराभ्यां संप्राप्त चक्रांकण भाष्यसारं श्रीनूत्नरङ्गेऽत्र यतौ समर्पितस्वं श्रीकृष्णमार्यं गुरुवर्यमीडे विरोधे कार्तिके मासे शतताराकृतोदयम् योगाचार्यं कृष्णमार्यं गुरुवर्यमहं भजे। कृष्णसूरीदयापात्रं ज्ञानवैराग्यभूषणं श्रीमद्वेङ्कटनाथार्यं वन्देऽहं योगदेशिकं। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः।
Thank you for Nrithya. And I think, not all of our listeners are from the Krishnamacharya tradition, which you were just chanting to both Krishnamacharya and also the new chant for Desikachar, TKV Desikachar. Can you just give us a very brief summary of why that's important to start in an auspicious way, being humble to a teacher? Could you just give us a brief summary before we get into the bird model? Because I think our listeners may not even understand the importance of that.
See, the thing with an invocation, usually at the commencement of anything, is customary. Whatever the action is, the intention setting being that let this go well, let there be nothing that comes in the way as a hindrance. Now, conventionally, this is offered to Ganesha as the remover of obstacles, the one who sets things in motion. But when it comes to teaching, specifically when one represents a lineage, a teaching lineage, we call it a parampara. Then we stand in front of the student, not in any individual capacity, but as a representative of a tradition that has survived a very long time. And it is a matter of connection, primarily in many ways that invocation, specifically the ones we do in the tradition of Kevan, the first is a chant addressed to Patanjali, whose Yoga Sutra till today remains undisputed with regard to the single most important text on yoga that every student, teacher, and I would say pretty much everyone must study. Even if one doesn't practice yoga, for the insights it brings about the mind. And therefore, Patanjali and then Krishnamacharya, the Acharya who brings this teaching to us, followed by Desikachar. And so, literally, there is this idea that, where we stand, we are standing on the steps that have been created by the teachers of the past. If they hadn't given us those steps because of their knowledge, then where would we stand? We have no wherewithal to stand with any sort of authority. And so the purpose of the chant is first of all to connect, to offer gratitude, and to seek the support of the Guru Parampara or the Jnana Parampara, the lineage of knowledge that stands behind us. At the same time, the purpose of the chant is also to bring in an attitude of arrogance, especially when it comes to disciplines like yoga. There can be the germ of arrogance also. I know so much, or I've been doing so much. And in that moment where we connect to the teachers who came before, is an acknowledgement that I am one more link on a longer chain. Therefore, let me approach this with humility, with a certain responsibility, because I cannot in any fashion behave in a manner that will bring disrepute to the lineage more than anything. And so with that commitment, one takes the next step. This is the primary reason behind the chanting and invocation, especially to the teachers.
Thank you for telling us that. I think people have a lot of different ideas about what that means. Am I giving away my sovereignty? Am I, kind of a drone that's just going to be in a cult? And I just want people to understand that it's an act, as you said, of connection, of humility, of understanding that it's not about me. It's about the teachings coming through.
And also, see, I think with truly great teachers is that there is no curtailing of another's ability to communicate or teach. I think across the world, we have so many who are taught by Desikachar or who are direct students of Krishnamacharya. They're definitely not clones of each other. They have very, very unique teaching styles. And that is natural. A good teacher will encourage them. But then it is the job of a good student to also bring honor to the teacher, to the tradition. And so that responsibility flows both ways.
Well, and next week, we're going to be talking to Geeta Shankar about the teacher-student relationship. So we'll get a lot more on that. But let's get into our topic of the day, which I'm so thrilled that you agreed to come and talk about. What we call the bird model, but what most people call the Pancha Maya model, the 5 layers from the Taittiriya Upanishad. So, the first thing I want to ask you is, how did this become such a popular model for yoga therapy? Because it's from the Upanishads. It isn't specific to yoga therapy yet. It seems that we've all decided we're going to use it for assessment. We're going to use it for therapeutic planning. We're going to take this model and really make it one of the primary fundamental principles for yoga therapy. How do you think that happened?
See, very honestly, I don't know. I mean, there are references. You see references in Puranas to how certain aspects of yoga can be adapted for therapeutic purposes. That's very clear. In fact, when it comes to pranayama, you have these references. But specifically, yoga chikitsa as such as a discipline seems to have evolved over time. Krishnamacharya is one of the pioneers. Now, when you come to the model per se, yes, Pancha Maya, also known as Pancha Maya Kosha, Pancha Kosha model, is presented primarily as an Upanishadic model to counter the notion that I am the body. Primarily that, because this is the thrust area of the Upanishads, is to realize one's nature, which is not of the material world. It is that which is not Prakriti. By coming up with this multi-dimensional structure of the human entity, body, breath, mind, a deeper, more reflective intellectual capacity that determines your personality and your core nature. What the model per se tries to do is to say that this is Brahman. Yes, my body, the body that I have been given, is an aspect of Brahman, but it is not equal to Brahman. The Brahman is not only the body, it is the body, but it is more. In this manner, in a way of using the what we call a prakriya, it's basically a counter thought that is generated to help us understand another thought. And so little by little, that identification, first you look at everything with value. So yes, this body is special. It serves the needs of me realizing my true nature, but this body is not entirely equal to Brahman. There is something more. In this manner, we are led layer by layer till the Anandamaya, which is our innermost dimension, closest to the Purusha. Through this process, you realize that within these 5 dimensions is that which is imperishable, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. That which is eternally true, that which is eternally the nature of knowledge, that which is infinite. Where is this? It is inside. Now, this is the approach. But when it comes to application, I must say, in my understanding, I have not seen it personally used in any other tradition outside the KVM to the extent that we do. In most yoga training, definitely there is some little emphasis on the Pancha Maya. Very broadly, this is how I have seen it even in many of the reference materials for currently the courses that are being run. You have the yoga training course, yoga wellness instructor, yoga therapist course, a number of courses that are being announced under the Ayush ministry. They touch very, very broadly on the Pancha Maya, speaking of 5 dimensions. However, I have not seen in that syllabus depth with regard to what is the component of each of those dimensions, which is where the birds come into significance. And it's mind-blowing, the connections that are there between each dimension through the bird model is something that has always blown my mind. And we have seen that discussed in great detail by Sir Desikachar in this tradition. And when exactly, I don't think I know when exactly it started being adapted, but the fact remains, it is one of the most useful models when you superimpose it on the Heyam Hetu Hanam Upayam model of the Yoga Sutra. When you look at these two together, they offer us a very solid, very, very reliable method of identification of a problem, identification of which dimension, which aspect of the body or the mind or the senses is affected, or how the interactions are playing out, which layer is impacting the other, how is the return, what is the communication, that feedback loop. All of this becomes much more easier for us to comprehend. And so as a diagnostic and a problem-solving model, I think it's very holistic. It doesn't put anybody into boxes. We're not expected, that if this problem happens in the Annamaya, then this is the effect on the Pranamaya, or this is the effect on the Vijnanamaya. You cannot bring it to a conclusion. It gives you so much scope for variety of application. How different people with the same issues, how the issue can come from a different dimension, how their effect because of that problem can happen from different dimensions, and because of that multiplicity of tools. Simply, we have such an array of tools. Now, we don't all have to use the same tools for the same problem, seemingly same problem. Back pain, you can say is generic. Low back pain is a very common condition. But this is not like you have a pill and you say, okay, you have back pain, let me give you this prescription. Here we have to evaluate why back pain, where is it coming from? Is it an Annamaya problem? Is it a Pranamaya problem? Or is it even deeper? Is it an Anandamaya problem? Accordingly, the tools that we're going to use will change. And I think that is the reason why Sir has made this a major part of our approach. And I would say that while I think all of us as yoga therapists do study the model in detail, in terms of our actual work, I think there is some level of integration where it's not like we're holding the model in front of us and saying, okay, this is it, and then this is how you match. I think it's a process that is so deeply ingrained that it is almost intuitive and happens spontaneously for us to be able to see that, okay, this is where the problem is. Let me try to address it using an Anandamaya tool or a Vijnanamaya tool and see where it goes. So at some level, I think with practice, it becomes so very intuitive and instinctive. That is how it applies.
Yeah, I can see that at first when you're learning to become a yoga therapist, it's really helpful to have, okay, what are the symptoms on each of these 5 layers? What might be the causes? It gives your brain something to lock down onto. But as you go along, we can't get stuck on the model then, right? Then we let go of the model. And as you said, it's kind of an intuitive flow that happens.
That's true of any model, because after a point, you will have to rely on your deepest instinct. And Sir has always told us, how do you develop that? It is through your practice. You have to be rooted in your personal practice. When you are, then automatically there is a part of you that will connect. And you somehow just know what is appropriate for that student in that context. The same may not hold good for another student, which means again you revisit the model differently. But then the model is a support.
Yep.
It's not your preliminary focus, because your primary point of information is your student itself.
That is what you're meditating on, is your student. They're your object. Yeah. I had this really interesting experience today. I was doing a meditation with Sridharan today, and we were doing all sorts of mudras and hand gestures. And I really inside understood pratyahara, that by bringing my hands close to my heart and my throat and my forehead and the top of my head, I really understood pratyahara in that moment in a different way than I had before. And I think that's what we're talking about, is your personal practice helps you to understand it kinesthetically or experientially. And now mudras will never be the same. Yeah. So could we, I think so many people are really understand, okay, there's these 5 layers. But when I took a course with you recently, and I'll just put this up here briefly, you went through, what's happening in the right wing of the bird, what's happening in the left wing of the bird, what's happening in the head, in the tail, in the core of the bird, for each of the 5 layers. And we're not going to do all of that tonight. But I think what a lot of people don't even understand is that at each one of those layers, say the physical layer, the Annamaya, there's 5 parts to the Annamaya, and there's 5 parts to the Prana Maya, and there's 5 parts to the Mano Maya. So could you, I don't want to go through every single part, but could you just help people to understand that there are 5 parts to every one of the 5 layers? Because I think many people don't even realize that.
Yes, I think this is very important, which is why I said the model is a very precious one. It is presented in the form of a bird. Now, why a bird? At the outset, that is the question. Why the bird? When you think about it, there is no overt answer when you look at the Upanishad. It is very matter of fact. It says, this is like a bird. And what kind of a bird? It has a head, it has a torso, it has 2 wings and a tail. Because these are the components that help the bird fly. Now, why the bird is something that we can reflect about, perhaps as a motive of freedom, of liberation, of not being bound. Perhaps the bird is a creature that caught the fancy of that rishi, of who has given us this Upanishad, and that developed into a discussion of the body in these terms, because we are also very much bird-like. Given our, if you trace evolution, it is not very difficult to envision the hands as wings and both the legs coming together as the tail end, and then you have the head and the torso. Now, here, when you look at the components, the head sets direction. So, pradhanyam, we say that which is primary, which is setting direction, is the head. What defines a bird is flight. its ability to move. How does it move? It moves using the wings. So the wings are the next two components, both equally important, right and left. Then you have the torso that's holding this together. You have the body, because this is not a disjoint bird. It's a very beautifully coordinated creature that flies, that is able to soar. And so there is the torso that holds all this. It gives information, receives information, acts as a possible point of communication. And you have the tail, because the tail, although we understand flight from the perspective of the bird using its wings, it is the tail that lends it the ability to navigate, to turn, and to navigate speed, to navigate its landing, its takeoff. All of this depends on the tail. So equally important. Now, when it comes to the model, how it is presented is literally 5 birds, one inside the other, and every Maya, or every one of these dimensions has a head, 2 wings, body, and tail. When you look at the Annamaya, it's a very straightforward model. It just says, this is it. This first understand that your outer form. This is the gross skeletal form, all the bodily components. There is the head, there are the 2 sides, you have the center, and you have the lower part. You can equate this to being a tail. It's when you come to the Pranamaya that each part is named. And you have to go deeper into the commentaries to understand the interrelationship between these parts. So in the Pranamaya, you have the Pancha Prana primarily. You have Prana as the head. Vyana and Apana are the wings. What is the torso? In the Upanishad is presented as Akasha. It represents Samana. And Prithvi is the tail. Earth is the tail, but it represents Udana. Now, specifically there, you see the difference in terminology because they indicate a certain functionality. Samana holds space for the other 3 primary functions, Prana, Apana, Vyana, to proceed because these are essential life-giving functions. The tail is Udana because the Udana Vayu has a very unique connection to the earth by way of karma. It is the Vayu that is responsible for keeping the Atma within for the duration of one's lifespan. And that lifespan is completed. Then it is Udana that activates and allows Prana to leave. Therefore, associated with Prithvi. You could say that if Annamaya is the outer layer, Pranamaya is extremely important as interface between body and mind. Because the signals from the mind to body to mind cannot happen without the role played by Pranamaya. From a therapeutic perspective also extremely vital because this is domain where we can actually make a lot of difference. We have a lot of strategies, many tools that can address the Pranamaya. Through the Pranamaya, we can address Annamaya and you can address Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. So very strategically located there. Then the third dimension is the Manomaya, which in the model has as its 4 components. The head, the 2 wings and the tail are the 4 Vedas. And the center is Adesha. Adesha, you could say very broadly, instructions. In the context of the bird itself, it is the instructions from the Brahmana portion of the Vedas which speak about ritual performance. Now, why the Vedas there? Because it is an Upanishadic model. But what do they represent? They represent the mental capacity for receiving, processing, holding various kinds of input. This input is coming from the senses and this is your base, your knowledge base for us to function, to perform any task in the world. So the study and the task orientation, in a sense, you could say learning from different sources, but remember learning coming through the senses and then its application in terms of a targeted activity where there is a defined beginning, middle, end, there is a goal. So doing it is part of the Manomaya. When it comes to the Vijnanamaya is deeper. It is not merely cognition. It is cognition, it is internalization, processing, and reflection. And also you could say this is the dimension where one's true personality emerges. In many ways, you can say that Vijnana literally means a special knowledge. What is this special knowledge? It is born of our experiences, how we interpret a situation, how we respond to a situation depends not on how you are receiving the input. It depends on how you are processing it within. But how a person processes it is very different from how B, C, or D might, because their vasanas are different. Their samskaras are different. Their personal, emotional, professional, various other backgrounds are likely to be different. Which is why in the Vijnanamaya, the head is Shraddha. Why Shraddha? Because the tail is Mahat. Mahat is, you could say, the sum total of all the knowledge that has been acquired. And that knowledge is stored in the form of vasanas, samskaras, mritis. And here you could understand Mahat also as the cosmic Mahat from the Sankhyan model of evolution. Literally, the totality of all lived experiences stored deep within as a form of knowledge that needs to be acted upon. These are our subliminal impressions. Now, these can be of different kinds. There can be certain positive and negative vasanas. Now, what of those vasanas are going to surface? How am I going to, let the vasanas guide my choices in the present? For all of this, that one requires Shraddha. And that ability to choose wisely, to choose with sincerity, to not waver from clarity. This is why Shraddha is the head, Mahat is the tail. The wings are Ritham and Satyam. Ritham is our ability to understand truth as is, an unadulterated, unvarnished, eternal truth. That is Ritham. It doesn't change. You could say it is the truth of the cosmos itself. Satyam is how I am able to communicate that truth. I have understood that truth in some way. My ability to communicate that truth appropriately, but it is in alignment with Ritham. It is not a separate truth. It is not a fabrication. It is true, but communicated through the lens of my personality. So Ritham and Satyam become the wings, and Yoga, Atma. Here, Yoga represents that capacity for contemplative reflection, Dhyanam, and the outcome of Dhyana is the clarity, insight, and clarity that comes through the experience becomes the crux of the bird. So it is a deeper aspect, and this shows multiple shades of our personality and how we are likely to respond to different triggers. Deeper still is the Anandamaya, which you could say is our innermost nature. This is our the closest to the Purusha, the self that is within. The word Ananda itself means delight. Everything in this world is for delight. The wings here, in fact, when you come to the terminology, they're very close. The head is Priyam, the wings are Moda and Pramoda, the Atma is Ananda, and the tail is Brahman. Now, Priyam, Modam, Pramodam are nothing but degrees of joy, progressively aggregating degrees of joy. When something that really pleases you, the thought of that, as it comes closer, how your joy grows. And when there is a total merging with what has given you that feeling of joy, even more delight. But what holds this experience together is Ananda. Ananda is delight, unalloyed delight. The tail is Brahman. Where are all these experiences coming from? They are coming because of the presence of the Brahman, the Atma within us. Now, Anandamaya is very important from a therapy perspective, because it marks our true nature, the closest aspect of the mind to the truest nature, which is sattva, the state of sattva dominance. But when the sattva is shaken, when we suffer, it is the Anandamaya that is deeply affected. And that is where trauma also sits. Trauma, the source of trauma sits deep in the Anandamaya. It manifests in the Vijnanamaya through samskaras, through various patterns, protective mechanisms, and so on. Working at the Anandamaya level is not easy. It's very difficult because we build up walls of protection. And also you see that this is where we retreat to. In times of great distress, we try to find that safe space that is within us. Very often we see that when people undergo trauma of some kind, or you're reliving trauma, there is a tendency to return to a fetal-like position, curled up. Why? Because somewhere intuitively you feel that that only safe zone is within, it's not outside. So there is a necessity to move inwards, which is the Anandamaya. But this is at its negative end when you speak of trauma. The extreme other end of the spectrum is simply delight. There is delight in everything. There's delight in waking up, delight in eating, delight in talking, sleeping. There's nothing that is to be rejected because these are all experiences of Ananda. But that is the state of mind of a yogi, of someone who has learned that Sukham and Dukkham are part of life. They are going to be here. What can you do? You can endure. You can endure. You can go through this, but you can anchor yourself in a state of sattva or a state of Ananda. To come there is very difficult, but then it acts as a guideline for, can I look therefore for little places, little points where you can penetrate into the Anandamaya and see if some measure of solace can be given. Now, when you see that there is so much of complexity in the structure of the 5 dimensions, immediately your attention is called also to the multiplicity of tools. So we know that in asana, you can use, in Annamaya, asana becomes an immediate tool, and the variety of ways in which we use asana. Pranayama is the tool for the pranamaya, because in pranayama, we are relying on the breath. When it comes to the manomaya, remember it is cognitive. And therefore, a tool such as chanting, nyasam, can do a lot to bring attention, to fix your attention, and for us to be very task-oriented with a lot of clarity and precision. When it comes to Vijnanamaya, the tools are more emotional in nature, more of bhavana, more exploring of feeling, reflection, which is why bhavana, japa, certain forms of meditative practices will help. At the Anandamaya level, it is about relationship. And because this is where our core is deeply affected. We are, by nature, we crave this relationship. That is human. But where there are relationships that we feel betrayed, or that we feel let down, or that we feel abused, or we feel unsafe in, then these are the areas where these are potential triggers for great dukkha. And so cultivating the right kind of relationship, and also certain other supporting tools such as pilgrimage to places where you can seek solace in the presence of other travelers and so on, or any such other tool. In fact, Sir was quite a genius in being able to identify what it is that would help a person, what would help a person stay in touch with that Anandamaya component, and come up with very, very unconventional practices, very beautifully designed, very simple ones that were in the presence of nature or by the sea. Things like this that will help you to connect to that space of quietness, which is what we have to do as far as Anandamaya is concerned. So when you look at the birds is when you realize how complex they are. And also it's not that they're not separate. What happens in the Pranamaya will affect the Vijnanamaya. What happens in the Anandamaya will affect the Annamaya. And so they're constantly, there is this back and forth that's happening, which if you are very cognizant with that model, you can instantly identify in your care seeker. So that's the reason for this, using the model in our work.
Beautiful review. And I do think you'll probably be teaching that. I think it was an 8-week course that you did for us. You'll be teaching that again soon. So maybe at the end you can tell us, because I'm sure when people hear this, they're going to want to go deeply into each of the birds and each part of each layer. But I would also like to talk about Desikachar's interpretation of the bird model, which some people say is a little bit different than maybe a classical interpretation of the bird model, and that is that he seemed very interested in the Vijnanamaya kind of personality layer, and that was famous for saying if your yoga is working, your relationships will be better, your personality will smooth out a bit. Can you talk a little bit about that?
See, from what I have studied, I don't think Sir's interpretation is going in any way against classical commentaries. When we say classical commentaries, we must remember that the Pancha Maya model per se is not a yogic model. It is an Upanishadic model, and its purpose is very different. In its Upanishadic context, it serves a very different purpose. However, it is adapted for use as a model for yoga therapy. So naturally, in terms of how you are interpreting it, also we must remember that Sir was a very unique teacher who believed in presenting classical teachings in a manner that would be most appropriate, most comprehensible to the present day listener. It doesn't mean that he diluted or altered the teachings in any way, but he interpreted them in a manner that is more, it is ready for us to receive, or more suited for us. So in that sense, if you are comparing with, say, a Shankara's commentary or a Shaina's commentary, then Sir's interpretation might seem a little simple, but there is no clash at all. He goes into everything, he gives us the same ideas. But we must remember the context. It is taken out of its Upanishadic context, and the idea is applied in the context of yoga therapy. So therein lies the difference. But yes, as you say, a lot of what Sir taught us with regard to therapy, because see, the certain tools are very obvious. Annamaya, Pranamaya, to a large extent, we know the tools that are at our disposal, asana, pranayama, and so on. But very often, when we are working with our care seekers, the trouble, the illnesses or the problems that they come with are not on one dimension. They are very often very complex, multi-layered issues, multiple issues, and multiple causes. So we are not dealing, in most cases, it's never just a back pain or just diabetes. It is always back pain with something else, possibly hypertension, lot of stress, sleeplessness, obesity, and there is no way to judge how things are going to mix up in the care seeker. Which is why that Vijnanamaya aspect and the Anandamaya was what Sir emphasized a lot. And he said, first try to build up a solid relationship with the person. Yes, sometimes it's hard because people build up walls. We build up barriers as defense. And it's very hard to penetrate. In which case, we can work at a peripheral level. You work with asana. You work with pranayama. Little by little, certain things will start to move. And you get little glimpses of personality, of something that a person wants to do, something that they seem very animated about. When you open a topic, they seem very engaged. Now that becomes a cue. And use that to open another window and see if now that can be something that will help someone access an aspect of their personality that they're actually appreciative of. And he would always do this, try to make the person feel good. Because usually someone who's coming for yoga therapy support, many people may not be in a very good frame of mind. There is a tendency for putting oneself down, to be very vulnerable emotionally. Sometimes depression also. Increasingly, we see a lot of depression, lot of anguish. And so, Sir, we have seen him in action several times. We were lucky to observe him when he was consulting. He would open a very free, general conversation, no pressure at all. It would be very casually done and very gently he'll narrow at something that that person is exceptionally good at or takes delight in. It could be cooking, it could be drawing, it could be singing. And then he would say, why don't you sing this song for me? Or why don't you draw this and show me? And then he would say, see how beautiful this is. What a remarkable piece of work, or what a lovely voice. Instantly that way of setting people at ease. Because the moment you're at ease, literally the whole system is responding. Vyuthana nirodha samskarayo abhibhava pradurbhava nirodakshana chittanvayo nirodha parinama, says chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutra. That moment where that relaxation sets in the mind, the whole system will respond. And that becomes a very conducive state, because then the person is that much more amenable for any intervention. And so if somehow we can target a change in the emotional outlook, in their feeling about themselves, because this is the Vijnanamaya. And from there we can access the Anandamaya, then we can make greater inroads. rather than a clinical, I don't really care what happens to you. You're a, care seeker. I'm a therapist, and I'm. This is my time. 50 minutes is up. Okay, get up. I'll see you next week. Now that doesn't happen as far as the KYM is concerned, because I know several of my colleagues. We sometimes teach for 2 hours at a time, for the simple reason that the student is not yet ready. We've just managed to get some toehold there, and we don't want to jar that. And so we never at any point of time have we said, okay, time up, I'll see you next class. That won't happen, because then it will undo everything that you tried to do to begin with. And so I think somewhere we've also inherited that approach in terms of how we explore and slowly deepen the relationship with the student. And in that, the teacher's personality makes a big difference. That Shraddha is also of the teacher. My conviction in what I'm saying, my conviction in my practice, my ability to stand as a representative of what I am speaking about, I think that also makes a big difference. All of this will come together in creating that Anandamaya link. This I've seen with many students who had come in to see Sir. I have seen it myself, that this one morning, Sir came into the mandiram. Many of us were there. I think he was coming in for a class. And one of his old students was waiting in the front office. And so he immediately went and he said hello. And he said, I'm sorry, do I have a class with you? Because I don't have it on my calendar. And the person said, no, I didn't come for a class. I just came to see you. And I'm leaving now because I'm happy. I just wanted to see you. That's all. It was a very moving experience, because that was it. That was the exchange. And there was no further expectation on the part of the student from the teacher. It was simply a very, very genuine intention of wanting to see her teacher and then just leave. That's all. She said, I came walking this side. I popped in to see if you were around. I wanted to say hello and leave. I wanted to see you. I'm feeling good now. So that is the power of relationship. But if we can inspire that kind of a faith, that kind of a trust, and where is it coming? It's coming not because of a dependence on the teacher. This is again something we have to be very clear, because Sir would always say yoga is a process of empowerment, self-empowerment. It's not creating a false dependence on the teacher. It is the response is because of regard, of reverence for what has been received. But the healing happens under the student's own self-empowerment. The teacher is only an enabler, holding space for these transformations to happen. But we've realized if Vijnanamaya level changes start taking place, then the kind of compliance and changes overall that happen are remarkable. They become long-term practitioners. Unless that need to practice filters into the Vijnanamaya, otherwise they'll be there 2 classes, 3 classes, and then we won't hear from the student until some other problem crops up. So that's why the Vijnanamaya becomes a very important target point.
It's so interesting, because as we teachers, yoga therapists, through our own practice and through our own connection with our teachers and our studies, we, I think, naturally have more sweetness, more sukha, more kind of maitri, karuna, friendliness. And that's what I really, since the early 2000s, when I started coming to the KYM, that's what kept me coming back, was that sweetness, that kindness, that the personalities of the people that I want to study with. Right. And then through that, hopefully I can start to pass that on to the people who study with me. Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting to me that 20 years later, that's what has kept me with KYM. I don't go take classes from all different traditions, because that's what really matters to me, is that all of you are sattvic. Not, I'm not saying 100% of the time, but. No,
we all have our moments. See, that is natural. We are all human. And I think Sir was also human in his own way. I mean, I'm not putting him on a God pedestal or anything, but there was much to learn. He was a remarkable teacher, remarkable source of inspiration. Yes, we all have our moments. We have our idiosyncrasies, but we work through that.
Yeah.
And I think that is also something that's very special, that holds the teachers of the KYM together. Because we are connected by our link to Sir over and above everything. It is that. that he impacted the lives of many people, not in the same way. He had a very unique relationship, which is again a purely Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya connection. He did not have to relate to two different people the same way. Yeah. Different points of conversation. With some, he would talk. With others, he would just come. So often, I mean, these are very beautiful memories. As you're teaching, he'll come inside, he'll open the door, he'll have this sugar candy in his pocket. He'll say, Nrithya, Indama, and he'll give you one candy, and then he'll say, okay, ma, and he'll walk out. But that was those small moments, that's all. He didn't have to have a long conversation or anything. But when there was a need, he would always respond. And I think these are the things that we have integrated. If we have not integrated, then it's a shame. But I think this is what holds us together, because this is the legacy left behind by Sir in terms of his work, that creating that relationship, creating connection, I think was the heart of his yoga. And that is truly the heart of the Keva.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think another pillar that's very unique is, when you look at the Pancha Maya layer and the use of pranayama through chanting while doing asana. I mean, to me, he and the KYM basically have taken pranayama out of lotus position, with Murgi Mudra, and they have brought it into something that's much more accessible in terms of, I was working with my teacher tonight, right before this. Geeta was teaching me a lesson, and she had me doing all of these, ratios during my asana practice. So a 4-count inhale every time I extended my body, and a 6-count exhale every time I compressed my abdomen. So can you talk just for a few minutes about the importance of pranayama and how Sir weaved it in so many different ways to get the prana to flow in the body, which of course creates healing?
Yes. See, the one thing that I think we all agree when you are within the Krishnamacharya tradition is that there is no asana without breath work. Whether we call it pranayama or not is secondary. See, because if you're being very, very conventional, then pranayama is not this. Pranayama is at the highest level, kevala kumbhaka, the total, complete cessation of the prana vrittis, where the prana is suspended within. That is the highest level. But now by convention, we see that any breathing technique is known as pranayama. Nevertheless, a number of important thrust areas where this awareness of and regulation of breath has been woven into the work. The first is the link between breath and movement. This is, I think, one of the first things that is drilled into us as trainees, as trainee teachers and therapists, is that there is no question of movement without breath. That it is always breaths that support. So you start the breath, start the movement. Finish the movement, finish the breath. The movement has to be cushioned within the breath, literally, to avoid injury. At the same time, to bring attention. Your mind has to be present, and the breath becomes the vehicle of this. Then, of course, the various other principles with regard to what movement do you inhale. Expansive movements, you inhale. Contractive movements, you exhale. In twisting, you exhale. In untwisting, you inhale. These are again fundamental principles. The pause. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Deliberate pause to bring again attention. So you see at an asana level, all of these are woven. Ujjayi breathing. Of course, in therapy, depending on the capacity of the student, we may not insist on everything immediately. We will lead them to it. But for a teacher trainee or a therapist trainee, then this becomes mandated. You have to do this. Now, already you see that within asana, one layer is added. Then there is immense scope when you look at the multiple ways in which breath can be used. Simply using kala, the idea of ratios. You can have equal exhale. You can have free inhale, free exhale. You can have equal inhale, equal exhale. You can lengthen exhale. You can lengthen only inhale. You can lengthen both. Then you can introduce a hold component. Once with that hold component, then you have an entire array of ratios. You have the samavritti ratios. You have any number of vishamavritti ratios. So many different ways of altering the experience of the same practice itself. And this is an experiment I've very often tried when I teach application of yoga, is to give one practice, just one asana practice. I won't change the practice. It could be any basic practice. It could be a Tadasana, Pashottanasana, Virabhadrasana, Uttanasana, maybe a Vajrasana, Chakravakasana sequence. 4-5 postures, rest. Do it with different types of breathing. Keep changing the ratio. Sometimes give it an inhale focused ratio. Sometimes exhale focused. Sometimes focus only on the hold. When you keep changing it, observe the experience that you have without changing the movement. And there is so much learning in that. And in my experience, again, I must say that like you, I don't think many of us in the KYM, once we've reached our destination, we haven't had a need to go anywhere else. And so our area of work has continued to remain only the KYM and around KYM's work, SIR's teaching. But nevertheless, that sheer vastness of possibility that breath unfolds, I have not seen it in any other tradition in my travels. That yes, we use it, but not to the scope and depth that Sir has managed to create or weave practices. Thirdly is the use of chanting. Very, very subtle way of bringing in the prana component, especially to beginners in therapy, because we understand, see, now there is a lot of support from Western medical science, which proves the idea of the polyvagal theory, the importance of stimulation of the vagus nerve. All of this is now understood, why the vagus nerve plays such an important role in the parasympathetic nervous activity, why rest and digest is important for the body to heal. All of this is known, validated, lot of data. Now, in the times that Sir is also working, Krishnamacharya Sir, evolving their approaches, I honestly don't know if they had a term for these things in terms of medical science, but you have a Yoga Sutra reference, Prachardana Vidharanabhyam Va Pranasya, where you focus on the exhale and the hold after the exhale. That can become a pathway towards pacification of the mind. Now, with that as the agama, you see how beautifully chanting is brought into the scope of practice. Very simply, because if you're trying to teach someone to breathe, now the average person may not be very aware of breath dynamics, what's happening in the chest, what happens in the stomach, what's happening to my diaphragm is not common knowledge. And most people might also be very rattled if you give them too much information. So in general, I think we all lose that ability to pay attention to our breath because it's something you take for granted. Unless you're suffering with breathlessness, you're not going to pay attention to the breath. So when you get someone to breathe, you say, okay, now observe your breath and you inhale and you exhale. You notice, okay, maybe the exhale is 4 counts or 3 counts. Using a simple chant, inhale, ma. So you chant, and as you chant, you breathe out. You will find a lengthening of at least 2 times to 3 times in just the exhale function when you use a simple open sound. It doesn't have to be anything complex. But when that exhale function is triggered, over a period of time, you can also work on inhalation and then through this on the hold. And so that again becomes a very, very effective way of lengthening breath without even knowing it. And we find that it has a very calming effect in terms of the care seeker. Because you tell them, okay, inhale, you have to do this. Exhale, you have to do this. Expand your chest, contract your abdomen. Sometimes too many instructions and they get very puzzled and they get confused, may not understand what has to be done. Rather, you say, okay, raise your arms. And then as you lower it, you just say ma. So one instruction at a time. Through the chant, you've already introduced how breath works. They may not realize it. Slowly you can lead them into it. So that's another way in which pranayama has been brought into asana and then of course into other practices. Now it goes without saying therefore that pranayama becomes a fundamental component even in bhavana and dhyana based practices. So a lot can be done when we just start connecting to the idea of breath as a vehicle of prana. And therefore, how using breath can alter many things. This is again, although we know it, there was a reiteration of this learning. I think in the last 2 years, as we've been working more and more with post-COVID, long-haul COVID symptoms, we are finding the role of prana very, very significantly, specifically in dealing with fatigue, in dealing with mental fogging that happens post-COVID. We're having very good results with different types of pranayama, helping people clear up their heads, come back to a normal functioning, gain a little better control over their breath, overall better improvement in health, lifestyle, quality of life, we see happening through the work with prana and breath. Because in most COVID conditions, movement is very, very limited because of the fatigue. And so this is again a reiteration of a learning, I think, that we already knew, but the situation brought it more to the forefront. These are some of the ways. I think I've covered most of the areas.
Yes. Nrithya, I know that we have so many more things we could talk about, but it has been a full hour already. And could you tell us a little bit about the bird class? I think you're teaching another section of it, yes?
Yeah, we are doing another series of the bird model. It's called Pakshi Kalpana. It's running currently. We've done, I think, 4-5 sessions. The preliminary sessions are over. It's planned to be a 10-15 hour program. But in case someone is interested, you're welcome to sign up because the videos will be made accessible. With a little bit of a gap, you will receive access to content and the videos. So that is an option that is open. People are welcome to join at any point.
And how would they go about, would they email the KYM?
Yes, you email the KYM. You can write to registration at kym.org or webinar at kym.org. And if you're interested, we will take it further from the back end. I will pass on the information. If someone's interested, you're welcome to join at any point and then catch up with the videos as and when we start sending them to you.
Perfect. And anytime we would like to look at the variety of classes that are offered, we can go to kym.org and yes, all of them are listed. And
yes, we have all our listings.
I think you see me maybe 3 or 4 mornings a week. So I just can't. I am so
It's always a pleasure.
I am so happy that it's being offered online. It's really remarkable, life changing. So
life changes, and I think for us from the KYM perspective, this has been the only way we can stay connected. Given that none of our students are able to visit, we are still not open for group classes. It's been 2 years almost that we've not been having group classes. We've recently, in the last year, we've had one-on-one therapy because we find again that people are more ready. They want to come, especially for therapy. Even though you might feel, people are afraid and, afraid of exposure, the interest is, we find more and more people wanting to walk in, come to the KYM for a personal class. But unfortunately, we're not able to do that with our groups, especially international groups. And so the webinar mode becomes the only viable, currently available mode where we are able to reach out, connect, and keep things going. And so I think now we are in an age of a new Atha. I think we're going to have to adapt to this and make hybrid courses possible. In fact, that's what we've been doing. Our latest teacher training is hybrid. So it's like 6 months online and then a 10-day intensive at the KYM. So we're trying to, come up with different ways where we still maintain that personal connection without making everything, just delivered online, which is also why, to the extent possible, we try to give you live classes so that at least there is a feeling that you're listening to the teacher live. Because I know there are some institutes that offer asynchronous learning with pre-recorded videos, which we can do. I mean, if there is a need, we are welcome to. We are ready to share videos, but at least give that feeling of a connect through the live webinars. So I think going ahead, we are looking at this hybrid mix of both online, offline, wherever possible, and also one-on-one. We offer a lot of one-on-one options in any subject.
Both online and in person.
Both offline and online, depending on what the person wants to study. It could be theory, it could be philosophy, it could be yoga literature, it could be practice, whatever it is. We're offering all of this one-on-one as well.
Well, thank you so much. And as I told you when we were beginning, I'll probably see you in about 10 hours or so for my morning class. I'm going to bed. But
All right, all right. Good night. It's always a pleasure, Annie.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Nrithya from the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. And, one thing I wanted to say before we end today is that you can find all of the current classes being offered online at the KYM website, which is www.kym.org. And you can also contribute to their Mitra outreach, community outreach. We at Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, we feel strongly that we need to give back and support the KYM Mitra. So you could look in the show notes and donate through the link that we offer, and then we transfer that money to them, which sometimes will save you the bank transfer fee. If I send over 100% of the proceeds through, one bank transfer, we just have to pay it once instead of every person having to figure out a bank transfer. And many of you may not realize this, but just in the last couple of months, India has become very specific about how international funds are being given, especially through charity, into the country. So where it used to be quite easy to transfer money, it's suddenly gotten a little difficult. So that's one of the reasons that if you'd like to donate through the link in the show notes to KYM Mitra, we'll be happy to do the rest. But if you want to go directly to KYM, you can see here they do accept donations for working with all sorts of people in the community, children with Down syndrome, orphanages. The program that I was so fortunate to get to go and see and kind of observe was a program of women in prison. And they were doing wonderful things with the women who were going to be in prison for life. So I just want to really encourage everyone to think about giving back to India, to a tradition that's been around for a long, long time. And there's other ones too. There's many wonderful traditions that I know of in South India, but this just happens to be the one that has really touched my heart and I've felt connected to for so many years. So thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. We're going to talk about the teacher-student relationship with my teacher, Geeta Shankar, who has studied with Mr. Desikachar for many, many decades. So she'll have a bunch of great stories for us about Sir. All right, have a great week. Hey, did you know that each week on the podcast, we give you a free infographic that you can use with your clients, your students, or for your own personal studies? So check out the show notes. There's a link on where you can sign up. And not only will we send you the infographic from this week, but if there's a topic that's similar in the future, we'll also put you on that list. And we'll never sell your data or send you things that you haven't asked for. Thank you for listening to our show today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share the episode with a friend or colleague. We're so grateful you're willing to share. Also, you could write us a review on most major platforms that host podcasts. Give us 5 stars if you appreciate the show and tell us what you love so that we can do more of that. Finally, we support several nonprofit organizations through this podcast. See the show notes to understand how you can help. If you'd like to be a guest or a sponsor for this program, contact us at the email welcome@theoptimalstate.com. welcome@theoptimalstate.com. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria, and Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.